Internet. You might remember from my last video, I mentioned that I did not have editing software. That was a while ago, but that is still the case. So we're just going to do this in one take and wing it. I just wanted to make a quick little video about some of my favorite cheap art supplies that I use. I grew up without access to expensive art materials and that sort of thing. So I just kind of got really attached to cheap junk, and I still am. I hate spending money on things when I can use cheap stuff and have fun. You know, there are some things that are worth spending money on, of course, but if you can have fun with cheap supplies, why not do it? So here I am. I just wanted to give 10 quick items that I like to use that are relatively inexpensive. So the first one is Georgia Pacific cardstock. And when I grew up drawing, I drew on loose leaf paper. I didn't have access to nice paper. To me, printer paper, like white computer paper, was like the golden art material for like high quality art. It took me a long time to learn that printer paper is garbage and that you probably shouldn't be drawing on it. So this is a lot better. I don't believe it's acid free. It's not going to last forever, but it is like $5 for like 150 pages. So I use this stuff all the time. It's really fun to use markers on. It's really smooth. I make sketchbooks out of it, use them all the time. It's probably not going to last forever, but I generally illustrate with markers, which is not a medium that's going to last forever. So as long as it lasts long enough to get to the bed of my scanner, which is right behind the camera there, that's all that matters to me. So yeah, that's definitely one that I recommend, just if you want to have fun drawing on something that's nicer than printer paper. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was these really cheap Crayola erasable colored pencils. So I would get really frustrated when I'd draw, in pencil and then do line art on top of it and then go to color and markers, and then that graphite underneath would smudge and it was like, I just ruined that thing that I've been working on. So recently I bought these really cheap erasable colored pencils by Crayola on Amazon, and I'm sure that there's nicer erasable colored pencils out there. I'm not using these as like a standalone art thing. I'm using these for sketching, and it's nice because they don't really smudge. They kind of dissolve into the markers as I'm using them. So I generally don't use black, but I have a whole bunch of these. I got like really cheap, use them all the time, love them. You end up not really seeing them in the final result, so it doesn't really matter how nice they look on their own. So for me, they work excellent. The next item that I use a lot is also by Crayola, which I know everyone's like, oh my god, Crayola, like, that's for kids. But if I have fun with it, who cares? So that's Crayola Super Tips. I've got a box of 100 of these suckers. This is my third package of Super Tips, not the 100 pack. This is the only one of those I've got. You probably don't need this. I probably don't need this. But hell, it's fun. Oops, can I say that? Whatever, keep going, keep going. It's fun. So if I like drawing with them, I like to sketch, for fun. I made myself a little color key so I know what they actually look like because they aren't numbered. I numbered them myself. You can see the tape on there. These are not a high quality art material. These aren't going to last forever. They're going to fade with time, but who cares? It's fun. So that's what, for me, sketching is supposed to be about. And I'm more inclined to actually use inexpensive materials than expensive ones because to me they're precious and I have to hoard them. So if I'm going to use these to sketch and get colors down and do that sort of thing, do it. They're fun. Give it a shot. Next is a set of calligraphy pens that I got on Amazon. Black calligraphy pens. They're called by Boxin, I guess. It came in a set of 4 pens, and the reason why I got these are that they're refillable. So I had been going through a lot of Pit Artist pens. I use those a lot, but they run out and then they end up in a landfill. But these are refillable, so you take, the little end and you can unlock it and drip more ink in there, which I haven't had to do yet. But they're 4 brush tip sizes, so they're really fun for sketching. I really like the ink that comes in them. The box does say that it's waterproof, and it is not. It's not waterproof. So for some people that might be a problem. I am terrible at watercolors, so for me that's not a problem. So I use these with alcohol markers, and that's perfectly fine. You don't need them to be waterproof to use with alcohol markers. And that's another tip. I feel like when I was younger, I was like, oh, you have to use microns, you have to use, Pit Artist pens or anything like that, like the expensive fancy things. You don't need to use them, which brings me to my next favorite cheap art supply, which is the Papermate flare pens. The black one obviously is my favorite, but I can't find it right now. They come in lots of super cool rainbow colors. I was actually originally suggested to use these by an art professor for line drawings. So that's where I got the idea to use these. Um, you know, rather than sketching, if you're just going to be sketching, you don't need to use like a fancy India ink marker. You don't need to use like a micron. I actually really don't like microns. They're really fragile. I draw, like I break them, and then they're expensive, and again, disposable, gone. Like, you know, why don't I just use something cheap? If you're not going to be like watercoloring on top of them, you can use something cheap. You can use water-based markers if you're using alcohol markers. Perfectly fine. So I use these guys all the time. They're a lot of fun to sketch with. They add color to my sketchbook. You know, do what you got to do. And another pen that I like to use that's not an art pen is this Pilot V5 pen. I got this for free because I like borrowed it from someone and never gave it back, I think. Sorry to whoever that was. But it's really fun to sketch with. And it is water-based ink again, so it's not to be used underneath watercolors. You could certainly sketch on top of watercolors with it, and it's refillable. I'm trying to use more refillable art supplies, you know, keep all this plastic garbage out of the landfill, because if you're going through a lot of pens, you know, that's a lot of waste that you're producing, and like, there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to get like a refill cartridge or refill ink for existing pens that I already have. Like, this plastic's going to be around for like a million years. Might as well, you know, make it count. So I've been having a lot of fun sketching in these. I tend to sketch more freely when I'm using an inexpensive pen because I'm not worried about breaking it or damaging it or anything like that. My next favorite cheap art supply is book rings. If you don't know what they are, they're kind of like when you have a 3-ring binder and they pop open, but they're all on their own. So it's like a standalone 3-ring binder type thing. You can get these at the dollar store. That's where I got these ones. They aren't as nice as these nicer ones that I got like at Joann's or something like that. But I use these guys all the time to make my own sketchbooks with that cardstock I talked about earlier. I am more inclined to use a sketchbook if, you know, it's something that I make myself because it's less precious to me. If I go out and I purchase an expensive sketchbook, it's more intimidating and you can't take the pages out of it. I can open up any of my sketchbooks and take a page out and lay it flat on my scanner and scan it, and it's preserved forever on my computer. And, you know, then it goes right back where it belongs. Or if I really bomb a page and it looks awful, I can take it out and throw it away and never have to see it again in my life. And it doesn't damage my book. It's not a problem. So yeah, I do this all the time, and I definitely recommend it. I've made 3 of my own sketchbooks at this point. I've got a big one that's 8.5 by 11, and it just has like a cardstock cover, and I recycled the cardboard back from like an old watercolor pad that I used up. So that it's a little bit sturdier to draw on. So that one's 8.5 by 11. This one's 8.5 by 5.5, and my favorite is this little 4.25 by 5.5. It's like the perfect size. And also in here, besides the Georgia Pacific cardstock, I've got Canson XL watercolor paper, which is another cheap art supply that I like. I'm not great at watercoloring, but I do like to use water-based markers like those Crayola Super Tips that I talked about. And they do go down nicer on watercolor paper. And I don't want to use expensive watercolor paper because I don't do watercolor. Why would I want to invest in that? Like, it doesn't make any sense for me. So I get this cheap stuff. This was less than $10 for this like gigantic pad of it that I can cut down, and I put pages of it in my sketchbooks so that I can sketch with water markers on those pages. Another cheap art supply that I like is just these cheap Pentel erasers. So this one's, ooh, let me drop it. That one's just like, you know, the typical little eraser. And this one's one of those click erasers. I've had these guys for years. I use them all the time. They get the job done. And I think the last thing that I wanted to talk about was this Ohuhu brush pen that I got recently, which is another refillable art supply. It comes with like, I think 3 cartridges, and the one that I have in here you can fill up with your own ink. So I got some Noodler's Heart of Darkness that I put in here. Again, not waterproof. I don't need my pen to be waterproof. I'm not really using watercolor, so for me, this gets the job done. It's really nice. It's an actual bristles brush pen. I really like it. I have nothing but good things to say about it. So yeah, I think that's all 10 things that I wanted to talk about, hopefully. Um, yeah, so use cheap stuff. If you're actually going to use it, use it. Who cares if it's cheap? Who cares? All right. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.